Our next property type is the multifamily or apartment property type. There are a couple different ways to classify apartments. The two that I'm going to go over are the quality of a property and the size. So to talk about the quality of the property, there's the generic categories of Class A, Class B, and Class C. Now, there's no set definition for what a Class A, Class B, and Class C are, and it'll vary from market to market. And you often hear Class A, Class B, and Class C for the other different property types. Again, you want to understand when you're in a different market and a different property type exactly how the market defines it. But very generally, Class A are typically going to be your new, more efficient properties that have most of the amenities, if not all of the amenities that the market's looking for, and they're located in good locations. Class B are sort of like Class A, but a little bit older. Still have probably good solid locations, but it might feel a little bit tired and maybe doesn't offer all the amenities that a Class A building does. And then Class C, typically these are older buildings. They don't have the best locations. They probably have inferior mechanical and building systems and have a sort of below average or tired maintenance feel. Now, another way to classify apartments is by their size or layout. Typically, you're going to have high-rise apartments, mid-rise, and low-rise or garden style. So height is an important consideration because taller buildings generally present a significant higher cost structure to their owners, both due to the initial higher cost of development, as well as the continuing relatively high costs of more complex operating systems in the building. And typically, when you get above a higher, it's usually floor 7 or 8, you need special fire suppression systems, which are more costly. Now let's take a look at some of the different specific apartment styles. So the first picture we have here is what's called a garden style apartment, and you see them all over the Midwest. Typically, if you take a look at this picture here, they're probably no more than 3 stories. They typically will have open hallways. And while we can't see this here, typically they'll have some sort of clubhouse or pool or other sort of amenities that are located inside a courtyard where the people who live in each of the different units they can enjoy. The next type of apartment is a low-rise apartment, and they're typically no more than 4 to 5 stories. They often have about 2 stories of parking underneath. So let's continue on with our apartment styles. This right here in the top right-hand corner is a picture of a mid-rise apartment. Usually they're anywhere from 7 to 9 stories, and a lot of that has to do with needing a special fire suppression system. That will depend by geography, so it's going to be different from each place. But typically, it's over 8 floors. You need a special fire suppression system. So oftentimes you see the mid-rises stop at exactly 8 stories. Down below is a picture of a high-rise. These are going to be greater than 8 stories. Usually they top out at around 18 floors. And typically that has to do with the economics of all the construction costs. Your elevator and your structure and any of your fire safety are about similar for an 8 or 9 story floor building versus an 18. So most of the developers figure, hey, I'll just develop 18 because it's going to be more cost effective. All right, you can also take a look at apartments by different ownership types. Now, we went over these before, so I'm not going to cover them too much. But again, from an apartment complex, you can have a fee simple ownership. You can have a condo ownership of 1 unit or a couple units. It can be a cooperative ownership of an apartment building. And you can also, this is something new, you can also have timeshare ownership. And this is the right to use or a fee simple ownership of real estate for a specified period each year, usually in 1-week increments. So just like with other types, we're going to go over a couple of key terms for this property type. Absorption. I've mentioned this before. It's called absorption or take-up. This is a key metric in looking to see how the demand and supply in a market for a property type, where their equilibrium is. From a total and a year-over-year change in the number of households, the number of those who will need apartments or condominiums. Again, it's a good indicator of whether there's a strong demand or not for this type of property. The unit of measurement is per unit. When we took a look at some of the other property types like retail, for instance, the unit of measurement was square feet, but for apartments, the unit of measurement is per unit. A lease, we've talked about these a little bit before, but lease terms in most markets are for 1 year. In softer markets or markets where there's not a whole lot of demand, you might be able to get a 6-month lease. And in vacation markets, typically you can get a lease for as short as 1 or 2 weeks. Now, the rent rate is going to vary significantly by region and location, but it's a key assumption in any pro forma that you're going to build, and it's essential to understand local market conditions and understand how the subject property fits into the market. And typically that's done through a market analysis report that you'll perform. And lastly, rent up or lease up. This is the amount of time it takes to lease up a new building, and it usually ranges from 6 to 12 months. Re-renting vacancies in an existing property range from 1 to 4 months, assuming a reasonably strong rent. All right, now let's talk about some more terms that are applicable to the income statement. And a lot of these terms aren't only for apartment property type, but for the rest of the other property types. So there's a concept or a term called GPI, which stands for gross potential income. You also might hear GPR, which is gross potential revenue. So this is the maximum rental income a property can earn if it's fully occupied. From GPR or GPI, we're going to subtract out vacancy. Vacancy is usually expressed as a percentage of gross potential income and requires analysis of the local market conditions. Ranges for this property type are usually within the 3 to 7% range. Next are operating expenses. So generally the owner is going to pay for insurance, on-site payroll, real estate taxes, cleaning, painting, insurance, and a bunch of other expenses. Sometimes owners are going to pay for heat unless the units are separately metered. And so you want to, this is one of the first things you want to take a look at when you are looking to purchase a new apartment complex, is see whether the utilities are metered. You know that if they aren't, then you're going to be responsible for those expenses and have to factor those into the rent. And lastly, something called capital expenditures or CapEx. These are major expenditures, and the major expenditures in the apartment property types are generally known for the most part. For example, hot water heaters, refrigerator stoves, those usually have a life range anywhere between 7 and 10 years. Carpets are usually going to last for 5 years. So from a pro forma perspective, a per unit per year figure is used to account for expected costs such as roof replacements, paving a parking lot, and any other sort of major expense items. So on this slide, we have some characteristics that are fairly unique to the apartment property type. In comparison to other property types, apartment properties provide a relatively stable income stream. Their capital requirements are easier to forecast than for other property types, and they present a relatively low risk of product obsolescence. To residences, multifamily housing offers convenience, affordability, and flexibility. And like other real estate, multifamily residential development is highly cyclical. Major demographic trends also exert a substantial influence on multifamily construction. As local growth rates influence the overall demand for units, the composition of the population influences the demand for particular types of multifamily housing. However, regulation is more common for apartments and other property types. For example, rent control, fair housing laws, and building codes.